Hi everyone, this is Cloud Security Masterclass, and in this video, we'll be doing a lab walkthrough on AWS Roles. If this is your first time here, please take a look at our article on AWS Roles at cloudsecuritymasterclass.com. IAM roles are temporary credentials for accessing AWS APIs. This is in contrast to the long-lived credentials like username password, AWS access keys that are attached to IAM users. Okay, so let's go to the IAM console and create our very first role. So I'm going to click on roles here and click on create role. So roles are basically temporary credentials, right? But you need some form of long-term credential to be able to assume this role. And this is what are the different options that AWS provides you. It can be an AWS service like EC2 or Lambda. It can be another AWS account or an IAM user from another AWS account, or it can be any form of external user authenticated by third party or external, IDPs, right? And you can also create your own custom trust policy where you can identify the principal or the entity that you want to be able to assume this role. So for this demo, let's consider a simple use case where a developer is creating a serverless application on AWS, and they want to assign temporary credentials to their Lambda function to be able to list all the S3 buckets in this AWS account. So let's try to create an IAM role for that use case. So the first thing that we have to find out is who would be the identity assuming this role or the entity assuming this role. In this use case, it's going to be the Lambda function. So I'm going to click on Lambda and click on Next. Then the next thing that we have to figure out is what kind of permissions would be assigned to this IAM role. And since we just want this Lambda to read or list all the S3 buckets, we're just going to have an S3 read Amazon policy here. The next thing is we have to give this role a name. So let's call this my test role. And then this page gives you a summary of what we have done so far. So we have assigned a service, a Lambda service, as an owner of this role, or as having STS assume role privileges on this role. And B, we have given this role permissions to read S3 data. I'm going to click on create role. Now let's go to the Lambda service and try to create our Lambda function, which would have permissions to assume this role and thereby be able to get data from the S3 bucket. So there are no Lambda functions right now in this account. I'm going to click on create function, give this Lambda a name, my Lambda, select my programming language, and then I'm going to select the role which I just created, my test role. I'm going to click create function. Now I have a very simple code that I'm going to be copying to this Lambda. And this code, just 4 lines of code, is setting up the S3 client and calling up the Boto3 list underscore buckets function for this S3 bucket, which is going to list all the buckets which are there in this AWS account. Now, since we have already attached this role to this Lambda function, all the IAM magic is happening in the background where this Lambda is assuming that role and then using that role to get all the buckets in this account. So I'm going to click on deploy first, and I'm going to create a test case here. I'm going to click test now. So now you can see it is able to get all the data about the S3 buckets in the account. You see the name of the S3 bucket here. There's just one S3 bucket here, which is cloudsec.class. So we just looked at how we can assume an IAM role from an AWS service like Lambda. Let's take a look at another way of accessing the same IAM role. So let's go to the IAM section, and this time we'll be assuming the role with an IAM user. So I'm going to click on users. We already have one user created. We'll be creating a new access key ID for this user. So click on security credentials. So I'm going to copy the access key ID, go back to my console, click on, type in AWS configure, put in the access key ID, and I'm going to show the secret access key because I'm going to delete these later, put in that. And with that, I should be logged in with the user, but let's just confirm. And you see that we are logged in with the user one. And now if I try to do a basic command like AWS S3 ls, which should list all the S3 buckets in this account, I should get an error. And that's because we don't really have any permissions assigned to this user. So what we're going to do very neatly is that we're going to assume the role that we created before and try to use that role's permissions to list all the S3 buckets. So the command for that is AWS STS assume role ARN, and this is the ARN or the identifier for the role which we are trying to assume. So go back to roles and click on the role here, select the ARN, go back to the terminal, type that in, and then the other variable here is role session name, and this is just to identify the name of the session. So I'm gonna say user one session, and I'm gonna click enter. Now this is going to give an error because we have not given any permissions for this user to be able to assume this role, and we need to do that from the console. So let's go back to the console, go to the roles again, and within this role, if we go to trust relationships, we'll see the Lambda service which we have given the permissions earlier, and we're going to go to edit trust policy here and put a comma here and add a new identifier, and go back to IAM to fetch in the ARN for that role, for that user, sorry. And click on user one, click on the ARN, copy the ARN, come back to the IAM screen, and I'm going to paste this here. So with this, we have essentially said that this role can now be assumed not only by the Lambda service, but also by this user. Now click on update policy. This is done. Now if I go back to the console and try to run the click on AWS STS assume role again, and now you see, now this has given an output. It has listed down the new access key and the new access key, the secret access key, as well as a session token. Now this is very different from the credentials that you see from a normal IAM user. You don't see the session token part, and you don't even see the expiration part. If I click on date right now, you can see it's 127 is the current time, and the expiration date is 0227. So this credential is only valid for 1 hour. And where is that 1 hour coming from? If you go back to the console, click on roles, go back to the IAM role, you will see this 1 hour mentioned here. And this is something that you can update. You can put a maximum of 12 hours here. Custom duration can also be maximum of 12 hours, but not more than that. So you can update them. But the point being that this credential is a temporary credential as opposed to a long-term credential that is assigned to an IAM role, IAM user. So now what you're going to do is keep in mind that you have not really assumed this role. What you have done is that using the IAM user, you have tried to assume that role, and it has kind of given you out the credentials that now you can use to assume that. You will have to use command line parameters in order to be able to assume this role, because you need to provide that session token, without which you won't be able to assume the role. So this is a new way that I'm introducing of how to access the command line with these export parameters. So we are exporting the AWS access key ID, then you are exporting the AWS underscore secret access key, essentially storing these values in the environment variable, and finally you're exporting AWS underscore session underscore token, and copy it from here and paste. Now your command line should be set up. So let's test it out. AWS STS get caller identity. And now you see, now compare this with how the screen looks like when you are doing get caller identity for user, right? You see the AR in there, but you don't see this assume role part. There you have IAM part, and that's essentially the difference, right? Plus, obviously, this credential will only be valid for another hour. You can see the user one session. This is the session name which we provided when we were assuming the role. And now, if I do AWS S3 LS, we would now be able to see the S3 bucket. So this is it for the lab walkthrough. Keep watching out for more videos and articles at cloudsecuritymasterclass.com.